How you bisected me, the elegance of the scars. The disease, it was not chemical. You could not cure it. I cling to this chill. Watch how I unfurl before it. Flag of myself, a mirror distorted. This body, it is nothing. In an instant, I could transform it. Now it is a lake spreading outward. Now small and blank. A flat stone poised in a hand. It breaks apart, only the grains of it. Listen how they drift and scratch. The old shapes, the forms that were broken are still here. They reassemble, a buzz, a communion. They promise me courage, other virtues, the rough shield, freedom from pain. They tell me I am this or this, tube of calcium, star of blue phosphorus burning. Now the reenactment. Chips fall from a chisel, joints burst into loud red flour. A bird flies out of my mouth and into the ceiling. I was born with something called X-linked hypophosphatemia. So my bones did not grow like most people's bones grow. It's a failure to absorb phosphorus. And so I had bow legs. And when I was 13, 12, actually, they did this huge surgery on me where it's called an osteotomy, where they sort of break the bone in multiple places, flip the kneecap, put all these pins in. They actually leave the wound open with a halo around it. It's a long, arduous recovery process. And then your legs are supposed to be sort of straighter. And they always talk to me about this. In our generation, it was like fixing your body, like we're going to fix you. And it was really, it took me a long time. And it was a very, you know, how surgeons always say, it's not going to hurt that much. You're going to be uncomfortable. But it was a fairly major, I remember as a child just being completely shocked when I was sort of flung into that world of the body cast. I was in a body cast for almost 5-6 months. And more than that, I really persistently mourned because I was completely unprepared the body I'd had. It felt to me very much like a betrayal of who I actually was to be this new fixed person that was always described by everyone around me as a better version. Like, this is what you always should have been. This was the 60s. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Everyone was like, now you'll walk straight on your wedding day. Now you'll be a pretty girl. Now, blah, blah, blah. And I think right away, I internally sort of felt this kind of no, that's not really the story of me. And I think it's related to disability poetics because I feel like that whole sort of medical model of we can fix you, we can make you better, we can make you normal, quote, normal, was so profoundly ingrained in the time. Don't you feel that even when the surgery was extreme or strange, or the solution was baroque or cruel, that was what you did? And I wanted to underline that because I think that my concept of disability poetics is that it's essentially a poetics of liberation. And I think it's a poetics of liberation that applies to disabled people, but also to abled people who are kind of all existing under this tyranny of this kind of elusive normal. Well, you know, it was very rooted in sort of experience of kind of kid teasing, bullying, you know, like, because literally my social status in my little middle school kind of changed overnight, which was kind of startling. And that was a very uncomfortable, vivisected feeling because, you know, I kind of felt like, oh, that's what this was all about? Really? You know what I mean? And so I think there was a lot of complicated feelings that I think probably a lot of people with disabilities, certainly our generation with physical disabilities, went through, because there was sort of tremendous pressure on you to transform or to try new things or to be different. And so it was that sense of, kind of primary location in the disabled body, I think is what I would say, that was really important to me. I mean, I don't think science has to be distinct from nature, but I think it often is. And I think a lot of the way you're seeing it vivisected in this poem for me has to do with sort of still growing up in a kind of enlightened patriarchal era, Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment patriarchal era, because you couldn't be a person with a disabled person in the 60s and 70s without being exposed to this very sort of male centric, I would say, cis male centric idea that there was a solution, a rational solution to you who were a kind of natural problem. You know what I mean? Like, it's interesting how, I don't know, I think like most kids, I was very invested in nature, very quickly. I think most children are. And then there's sort of a disruption of that often in adolescence, where you sort of turn away from nature to the human. And I think that those kind of coincided around the time of my surgery. I mean, I literally went from being kind of the kid that's totally off on the corner in the playground to being sort of like semi-popular, because I'm pretty lively and everything. And I probably would have been anyway, because I was, just coming into myself more. But all of those for me became very associated, like a kind of turning away from nature toward the kind of rationalist science, which seemed to me very oppositional to the natural world as a adolescent and child. And I think it was because, in that Enlightenment construction, as a person with a disability, you are in some ways the unruly nature that needs to be kind of straightened up, don't you think? And so there was, because I remember, and this continues today in the medical model of disability, and I think that is the part of the science that, where your body's kind of made into this abstract problem that can be solved by technology, that I was trying to vivisect, that idea that, and so in that formulation, in many ways, I definitely think psychically, I thought of disability as alive with nature, and I still do, honestly. You know what I mean? Much more aligned with that sort of idea of multiplicity, diversity, fruition, whatever you want to call it. Not that I want to say being disabled is it all easy, or there's no pain involved in just the condition somebody that I have, but it felt like those sort of quote solutions to it were kind of nuts. I have become more feminist with age, where I've sort of realized that a lot of things about that sort of soothing, incredibly everywhere patriarchal voice, how sort of toxic and crazy in a lot of ways it was, kind of, I really think, coming out of the Enlightenment. I mean, I really think that one of the reasons people are so interested in disability poetics right now, and should be, is that in certain ways, we've always been a subterranean resistance to that Enlightenment kind of point of view that was more feminist, marginalized voice associated. Because I remember one of the first things that made me sort of become a disability activist and to some degree feminist was in some philosophy class in high school. They gave us David Hume to read, and he wrote about beauty and deformity, and good was beauty and bad was deformity. I mean, it was very like Enlightenment-y thing. And I remember being, I was probably 16, 15, stunned, like just stunned. And for the first time, I was like, no, no, no. You know what I mean? It was like my introduction to philosophy. I went to quite a good high school, I guess, introduction to philosophy class, and I tended to pay no attention to it. I was busy doing other things in the playgrounds or whatever. But I remember that just this moment of thinking, oh, this is something fundamental in all these ideas, and I am absolutely opposed to it. And I also remember very clearly having that sort of feeling that, when in my education, an authoritative voice was often positioned as a male voice. So pretty early, I think I started to kind of navigate that spectrum of women, nature, men, science, which isn't really true, because I don't want to say, women aren't good at science, but there was a sort of sense in my mind that the resistance to, I guess, what I would call that Enlightenment kind of structure that was so toxic for people with disabilities. I mean, I'm often curious, and Kenny, you know more about disability history than I do, but was there a period before that Enlightenment thing when people with disabilities weren't as cut off, or was it always, I'm curious about that, because I think in some ways you really start seeing that structure around of I guess disability shaming in a big way taking place right at the Enlightenment. I think I can. I mean, in some ways, the poem is kind of surreal and strange, because at one point, I think it gets strange when I say the old shapes, the forms that were broken are still here. It's like I've been broken into pieces or atomized, which is kind of bizarre, right? But I kept writing that and writing that. This poem kind of generated slowly over a period of many years. And at first, I never knew what to do with this poem, because I thought, well, when the person breaks into pieces, that makes no sense, right? How does that ever come together again? But I think what I was trying to say is I've been atomized by what's outside me. Like, if I'm really just this body that needs to be fixed because my legs are weird or short and my spine is different, and then I'm kind of all these pieces. I'm not a coherent person anymore, And so I feel like, and I have no rational explanation for this, that bird just came to me, but I feel like what it is that sort of consciousness of that split becomes sort of so profound that the only way the person can kind of survive it without being kind of, flattened by it or crushed by it or something, is to sort of become something else that's kind of outside those frames. I mean, you could argue in some ways that disability poetics is about affirming the potency of disability, and the fear of disability is in some ways very alive, just like the fear of women, to a difference to a fear of nature in some ways.